Today we are going to do a workshop regarding how to grieve your property's assessment. Your assessment is the value that the Nassau County Department of Assessment assigns to your property. And we're going to do an overview of the whole system. And then we're going to explain how to file the actual grievance application if you want to represent yourself. You want to file pro se. We're going to explain how to do it both on the paper application and online. So everybody should have been handed out 2 sheets of paper. The white sheet is the actual paper application that most people will need. And the yellow sheet is actually information about the Assessment Review Commission and the Assessment Review Commission website. It's how to file this grievance online. So to begin, we want to go over a timeline with you of events. So every year, first day of business, this year was January 2nd, 2018, the Nassau County Department of Assessment publishes a new tentative assessment roll. And on that assessment roll is a value that's assigned to every property in the county. Now, if you live in a Class 1 property, which is a 1, 2, or 3 family residential property, your value is determined by market value. And the assessment is based on comparable sales, or was based on comparable sales. If you live in a Class 2 property, those are the big apartment houses that are mostly co-op and condo, or a Class 3 property, where nobody lives, that's the public utilities and special franchises. And Class 4 property, those are commercial properties, and many of them have a residential component on top of the commercial businesses. For anybody who lives in those properties, those values are determined using another method. They actually use a capitalization and net income. However, every property in the county does get a new market value or a new assessment value. And what's important about that is that even though the county has frozen annual reassessments, if you've lived in the county, for more than 15 years or 18 years, you know that in the 2000s, the county used to do annual reassessment, and they froze that as of January 2nd, 2010. They froze the annual reassessment process. However, the assessment roll that's published every year is really very different from the year before. And that's because of what's going on at the other agency in Nassau County that's involved in this process, which is the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission. They're actually receiving a very large majority of these grievance applications every year. Last year, it was 200,000 applications. And they've been very proactive about acting on these grievances and reducing a very high rate of these challenges. So in the earlier years of this program, they actually were reducing close to 90%, or in some years over 90% of all the grievances filed. Over the last 8 years, it's actually averaged 78%. So it's a very high rate of challenges that are being reduced. And because of what they're doing, it actually changes the assessment roll every single year. So again, although there's no reassessment over at the Nassau County Department of Assessment, there is a new assessment roll every year, and it is really greatly different from the year before. So once the Nassau County Department of Assessment publishes their assessment roll, that begins this grievance period that we're in now. Every year in Nassau County, anybody who owns property has a right to challenge their property's assessment during the grievance period. And that's from the first day of business in January to the first day of business in March. So this year, that'll be March 1st, 2018. After the grievance period closes, then the agency, again, that receives all of the grievance applications, the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission, they have a very long period of time to review all of these grievance applications. They actually have from the second day of March all the way up until the end of March, the last day of March next year, to review these grievance applications. If you file a very clean grievance form, without any mistakes, You put in all of the information that's required, but you don't, make any mistakes. I'm going to show you what some of the pitfalls might be. Normally, you should get a decision from the Assessment Review Commission after Labor Day. So sometime in early September, a lot of these decisions are made. And what happens is, Assessment Review Commission will actually mail a decision to the filer. So you'll find out what they're going to do at that point. And then, if you don't agree with the decision, you actually have a right to appeal it. The first thing is you're going to get a decision, and you actually have to either accept it or reject it. You have to mail it back by a certain date. If you don't mail it back by the date that they're requesting, then they could withdraw their offer. So you have to make sure once you get a decision, if you want to accept it, that you mail it back by the date that they indicate. If you don't agree with the decision, you do have a right to appeal, but you have to wait until April of the following year. So that's the next period, April. You have a 1-month window of opportunity to actually appeal the decision. Now, if you do live in one of these Class 1 residential properties, and again, those are 1, 2, or 3 family homes, the way you would normally appeal the decision would be you would go to the county clerk's office, you would get a docket number to get on the calendar at Nassau County Supreme Court, and you would actually have a formal hearing before a hearing officer at Supreme Court where you get the chance to present your case. But you only have the opportunity to file that appeal to a grievance filed now next April. So anybody who filed a challenge last year in January and got a decision they didn't agree with, or they actually were turned down for a reduction of their assessment, this coming April they have the right to file an appeal. There's also another process if you don't qualify for this small claims assessment review. You can actually appeal by filing an Article 7 lawsuit against the county attorney. But you do have to file this appeal in April. One thing that you never told when you're solicited by the professional representatives, the attorneys and the property tax reduction consultants that have signed up most of the residential filers in the county, one thing you never told is that you don't have to hire them to file the initial challenge to your assessment, but you can hire somebody to file your appeal. So you never really told that, but that's true. So you can file for yourself, you can file pro se. If you get turned down and you decide to appeal, you can actually hire somebody at that point just to do your appeal. But the appeal is always done in April. Also in April, this assessment roll that's published now in January of 2018, in April of 2019, it becomes a final assessment roll. And although the county continues to make changes to the assessments based upon decisions that were made either late by the Assessment Review Commission or at the small claims, they want to continue to put any reductions that are going to be offered on the assessment roll right up until the end of September. The reason is because at the end of September, they have to make tax rolls. So the tax rolls are made at the end of September for the upcoming school tax bill every year. So this is the first bit of information you need to know. This assessment roll that was published January 2nd, 2018, it's going to be used for tax rolls for the school tax bills October 2019 and 2020, the 1920 school tax bill and the 2020 general tax bill. And that's the tax year that you're filing the challenge for. That tax year has to be on all the documents that you're presenting to the Assessment Review Commission. So the first thing you need to know is that the tax year you're actually filing the challenge for is tax year 2019-2020. So this year's assessment roll will be used for tax bills for the October school tax bill 2019-2020 and the general tax bill in January of 2020. Now, as you know, the school tax bill has the school taxes, and in many districts, the library taxes. That's true in Great Neck. The general tax bill has the county taxes, the town taxes, the county special district taxes, and the town special district taxes. So that's basically the timeline of events. One question I get asked all the time, and I get asked a lot up here in Great Neck, what about the villages? Now, as you know, there are 9 villages in Great Neck. You actually can file a challenge to your village assessment, but villages are separate. They're a separate assessing unit. They have the power from the state to do their own assessment rolls, and they do their own village taxes, as you know. So they're basically, they have to follow the same laws, but the window to do the grievance application, do the appeal, and when they publish tax bills, it's much shorter. They consolidate, they condense this period of time that's happening over at the county. So for villages, for most villages that are on my right, on the right-hand side of the screen, and you know, some of you may know we have 31 villages in North Hempstead. We have half of all the villages in Nassau County. For those villages on the right-hand side, the grievance period begins February 1st, which is later this week, in 2 days. Goes to the 3rd Tuesday in February. And then they have to basically tell everybody by March 31st. They have to give a notice of determination. And their final assessment roll is April 1st. And then you have a period, you have a month to actually file a challenge to a decision, to appeal a decision. But by the beginning of June, they have to have a final assessment roll, and they have to create their village tax rolls. And then they send the village tax bills out the beginning of June, as you know, and they're always due by the beginning of July. For the villages, the 5 villages in Great Neck that are on the other side of the screen, those villages have to follow the same law as well, but they do their grievance period in the fall. So they've actually already done their grievance period for this coming June tax bill, but this coming fall, they'll have another grievance period for the June 2019 village taxes. The villages are at the bottom of the list there. Those are villages that are mainly in Manhasset and some in Roslyn. They just use the county assessment roll. So by filing a grievance to the county assessment roll, you're also going to file a grievance to your village taxes if you live there. So just to review, anybody who owns property in Nassau County has a right to file a challenge to their assessment, regardless if you're in a class 1, 2, 3. Well, nobody lives in a class 3 property, but if you own a class 1, 2, or 4 property, you have the right to appeal. Again, you do appeal to the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission. And as I said, there are 2 agencies involved in this process. Both of them have very important websites, which we're going to show you in this workshop. But the Assessment Review Commission is set up independently of the Department of Assessment, and they have a lot of power. It's known as a quasi-judicial body, and they have the power to make these reductions, which they have been doing very aggressively over the last 8 years. So, as I said, the first thing you need to know is you're filing a challenge to the 2019-2020 tax year. The second thing you have to know, you must know, is what is this value that the county has assigned to my property this year? You have to know that in order to file a grievance. So the first place you're going to be able to find that information is on the notice of tentative assessed value that the county mails out every year, beginning in January. So they've started mailing out these notices. Many people have gotten them. Some people may not have gotten them yet. We're going to show you how to find this notice online on the Department of Assessment website. But that's the first place that you could find out the assessed value that Department of Assessment has assigned to your property. You do need to know that in order to file a grievance. There is, though, just really some basic information that you have to file a very clean grievance application here. And as you can see on the white form that we handed out, the white application, it's pretty basic. It's only 2 pages. And there is only some basic information that's going to be required. Some of that information you're going to get on the Department of Assessment website, and we are going to show you how to find that. The address for that website is www.mynassauproperty.com. The website's been around for almost 20 years. And we're going to show you how to get onto that website and how to use it. But the Department of Assessment also has a direct phone number that you can call. We put it up on the screen. It is 516-571-1500. Now, yes. Now, I did mention that anybody who wants to file for themselves, representing themselves, can. You don't need to hire a representative or an attorney to do it. And if you've hired somebody in the past, you don't need to have somebody this year or going forward. Regarding, these representatives that are very aggressive in trying to solicit everybody, the biggest firms have over 20,000 clients now, so they're pretty successful in doing this. But as you may know, you probably know that they do charge anywhere from 40 to 50% of whatever they save you. So there is a big benefit to knowing how to do it yourself and doing it yourself, especially if you're successful. But what you want to make sure is that for every single tax year, you don't want more than one representative. So if you're representing yourself, you should be the only representative on the property. You don't want to represent yourself, file yourself, and also hire somebody for the same tax year. You also don't want to hire two separate companies for the same tax year. That would create a situation where you have a duplicate filing, and that would absolutely stall your application and most likely move you to the back of the line, which, as I mentioned, 200,000 of these applications are filed. So you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, if you've hired somebody in the past, you can simply send them a letter saying that you want to represent yourself, and you also should send a copy of that letter to the Assessment Review Commission. If you've already hired somebody for this year, but you want to do this in the future, then you could just tell them that going forward, you want to represent yourself, file an appeal to the assessment. Anyway, it's very important to know, though, that the Assessment Review Commission can only do one of two things. One is they could reduce your assessment. The second thing is they could just leave it the way it is. But they actually can't go in and decide to increase your assessment because you filed one of these grievance applications against them. It also doesn't trigger any kind of field inspection. It's not like filing for building permits where you're doing work on your house and building inspectors come. No inspectors can come and inspect your property if you file an appeal. There's actually very little downside. There's no downside. That's why there are so many appeals. The number one reason probably is because the tax levies are so high. The number two reason is because in the system that we have now in Nassau County, actually, because the Assessment Review Commission is so aggressive in wanting to settle all of these challenges, that they're actually reducing such a high rate of them, you want to be included in that group. You want to be part of the filers. Because if you're not filing, you're actually falling further and further behind the curve, and you are picking up a greater share of the tax levy. So that's also a reason why there are so many of these. But the third reason is you need to know that ARC can't really do anything to you for filing an application except reduce your assessment or leave it the way it is. So again, there is no downside. This is also a grievance period. Somebody feels that they're in the wrong class, they've been misclassified, they would file a grievance application now. And anybody who filed for an exemption last fall and got denied, they would file a challenge to that as well. The reason why we bring that up is because there are 3 separate forms that the Assessment Review Commission accepts on paper, and you want to make sure you're filing the correct form. So the form you're filing, if you live in a Class 1 residential property, which is, again, a 1, 2, or 3 family home, the form that you need to use is the AR1 form. That's what we sent out. You don't want to file the wrong form. That would be a reason for them to disqualify your grievance application. Also, you want to make sure it says the correct tax year. the forms we handed out should say 2019, 2020. That's very important. The forms from all the previous years are identical to this year's form. So if there's still some of last year's forms of the year before floating around, you don't want to use it because you could, get disqualified. So the form you want to use if you're in a Class 1 property is the AR1 form, and it should say tax year 2019, 2020. For anybody in a Class 2, 3, or 4 property that's filing a challenge, they would use the AR2 form, and anybody who's filing a challenge regarding a property class or about an exemption denial, they would use the AR3 form. So we're going to go through the whole application with you. And again, it's really very basic and pretty simple to do it. But if you have any questions, afterwards, you can contact the Assessment Review Commission. So they have a phone number. It's on the yellow form that we handed out, but they do have a phone number, 516-571-3214. And they have a website. It's separate from Department of Assessment. They have their own website. You have to get there by going to the Nassau County website first, and then going to departments and going to Assessment Review Commission. But you can communicate with them by telephone or online. Also, we want to mention that you can submit additional information with your grievance application. So you can see it's only, 2 pages back to back, and they're only asking for some basic information. But if you have additional information that you think is going to help your case, you could attach that to your grievance application. You just have to make sure that if you're sending in attachments, we're going to show you where to do that on the form. But you want to make sure that you put the correct tax year, which is 2019, 2020. If you have more than one page, you want to number the pages. And then the next thing that you have to put on those attachments, your section, block, and lot. Now, section, block, and lot is the third thing that you have to know in order to file a grievance application. Nassau County assigns a unique section, block, and lot to every single property, every single parcel in the county. So you do have to have yours, and it would have to be on any attachment. So we're going to show you how to find your section, block, and lot, but that's very important. That's mandatory. So you want to create a checklist before you begin your application. And the next thing that you need to know is, what are you going to say is your estimated value of your property? And whatever you say, it has to be lower than the value the county's assigned to your property. So you need to have a lower estimated value. And I'm going to talk about estimated values and how people get to those lower values when we get to that part of the application in a minute. But you do need to have a lower estimated value. You are going to complete and sign the form. And there are 2 ways to file these grievance applications. One, I said, is on the paper application. The other is online. If you're doing the paper application, there's 2 things you could do. One would be you could file in person. So what you would do is you would take the finished original, make a copy of it, bring the original and copy to 240 Old Country Road in Mineola to the 4th floor. That's actually the office of the Department of Assessment, but Assessment Review Commission has set up shop there during the grievance period, and they're receiving the grievance applications there. So you go up to the 4th floor with your original and copy, stamp in the original, they'll take the application, they'll stamp the copy and give it back to you as a receipt. So you want a receipt that you actually filed something. That's very important. You can file a grievance application by mail, but if you're mailing it, it absolutely must be postmarked by March 1st, 2018. And also, you should mail it certified mail, return receipt requested, because you want evidence, you want proof that you actually mailed a grievance application. If you do your application by mail, you never get a receipt from them. You don't want to be in the situation where in September you start calling them up looking for your decision and they tell you they don't have any record of your grievance application. So you don't want that to happen. You want to make sure that you send, If you're mailing, you want to send it certified mail, return receipt requested. Also, again, you can file online, which we're going to show you how to do. So a few things that I mentioned the notice of tentative assessment, and that's a very important notice because that's actually how you could find out what the value is the county assigned to your property. And on this notice, you could also find your section, block, and lot, which we're going to show you. So if you got it in the mail, then that means that the address they have for your property is correct. If for some reason you didn't get it in the mail, you're going to look it up online and see what they have there. If they made a mistake on your address, you want to go back to the Nassau County Department of Assessment and have that corrected. So one side will have the month and the year, January 2018. The other side will have section, block, and lot. It'll say section, block, and lot, and there'll be a string of numbers. That's actually, we're going to show you how to decipher that, but that's actually the way section, block, and lot is entered into the county computer program. It's entered that way at the Department of Assessment and at the Assessment Review Commission. And it's very important to see that and have that if you are going to file your appeal online. So looking at that string of numbers, the first two numbers is a section, the next three numbers is the block, then there are two spaces, and then the next four numbers is the lot. And then there's always a zero. But you enter it that way. The last zero is not actually part of the lot, but it is there on the computer. So if you're filing online, this is the way you would enter section, block, and lot. It also tells you your tax class, so you can see this property's in tax class 1. In the middle of the page is the value. That's the assessed value. So this is a class 1 property. It's based on a market value, and you can see that the market value is $418,800. Underneath that, it'll say level of assessment. That's always set at 1/4 of 1%. That's the fractional level of assessment, and that yields the taxable assessed value. So the taxable assessed value, 1047, that's actually the fraction of the market value that's being taxed. So all that information is there, and also the value for the previous January is there as well. So this notice, as again I said, it's being mailed out, but as far as we know, this is the last thing we heard is this is the last year they're mailing them, and that going forward they're only going to put them online. So you will need to be able to go online. It's going to be at the Department of Assessment website, which we're going to show you in a minute. And going forward, in order to get these, you are going to have to get it online. Regarding section, block, and lot, as I said, it's one of the pieces of information that you must have in order to file a grievance application. One way to find it, obviously on this notice of tentative assessment, you have to break down that string of numbers. But another way would be to take out your tax bill. If you get a tax bill directly from my office, you get the school tax bill in October and the general tax bill in January. On the tax bill, it'll tell you there's a school district code and then section, block, and lot. If you live in a condo, there's always two more numbers. There's a CA number, which identifies the condo. Each condo in Nassau County has a unique CA number. And then there's a unit number, which is the unit within the condo. So you can get section, block, and lot from your tax bill. Also, the third way you could get it is from your deed. So if you have your deed, you have a copy of your deed, you can take it out. And on the deed, it's going to say your section, block, and lot. We're also going to show you how to find the information online by looking up your property, by putting in your property's address. That'll find your property and all of the information on mynassauproperty.com. So that's the overview, and you could, basically from what I said, you just need to know, 4 things. You need to know that you're filing a grievance for tax year 2019-2020. You need to know the correct form you're using, if you're using the paper form. You do need to know your section, block, and lot. You need to know the market value that the county assigned to your property, and then you do need to have a lower estimated value to put on your grievance application form. So if you take out the form, which is the white sheet that we handed out, you can see it begins with, you have to just check, make sure you have the right form. It says AR1, it says 2019-2020. That's for everybody who lives in a Class 1 property, or owns a Class 1 property, I should say. The property doesn't have to be your primary residence to file a grievance application. The first part, Part A, is mandatory. You have to fill in the whole part. And the first thing they ask you is your section, block, and lot. And again, if you live in a condo, there's a CA number and a unit number as well. After that, you have to put in the property address. You put in the property address, and you have to make sure you put the complete address in, including city, state, and zip code. You want to put in the owner applicant's name. So the owner applicant's name is the name on the deed. So if the property is owned jointly by a husband and wife, you put both names. If it's owned by one, you put one name. If the property is in a trust or a life estate or an LLC, a corporation, then you would put that on the next line where it says other owner's name. Say other owners' names. So you put that information on the next line, but you do have to fill in all of Part A. So that's mandatory. Part B has to do with your lower estimated value. So some people actually do a lot of work to try to figure out what lower value they should put here, and they actually do a lot of work by trying to find their own comp sales. So what they're looking for, they have to have access to the internet. You have to, be able to look at some of these real estate websites. Obviously, somebody who's in the real estate field and has access to multiple listing services will have a lot of information. But they're looking for sales of properties that are similar to theirs, or maybe even more marketable, that sold for less than they're being assessed for. That would be evidence that they're overvalued and overassessed. They're looking for sales evidence. Now, in Nassau County right now, it's very hard to find sales. They're actually lower than the values that are on the assessment roll, because the assessment roll hasn't been updated since January 2nd, 2010. The last time they did annual reassessment was in 2009. Since that time, that was at the height of the crash and the height of the real estate crash, so those values were low. But since that time, the real estate market, just like the stock market, has been going up very steadily. So in many cases, in most cases, the sales that we have now are much higher than the values that are on the roll. And I'm going to show you a little bit later on, what's driving this process and what's driving, these reductions. But it will be hard to use sales to come up with an estimated market value. What more people do and what they want to do is they want to have parity with other homeowners that have homes that are similar to theirs, especially within their school district. So they're looking at, different assessments in their neighborhoods and in their school districts of homes that are similar to theirs. And they're finding, especially these homes that have been filing these grievances every single year, they're finding that their assessments are far lower than what they're valued for if they haven't been filing. So they're using those numbers as a basis for lower estimated value. But what the attorneys and the professionals who basically are representing most of the residential filers are doing is they'll just take the value that's on the assessment roll and divide by 2. 50%, and they'll put it in as a lower estimated value. Because you're allowed to put any number you want into this part of the application. The reason why, I'm going to stop for questions in a minute. The reason why they're doing this is because they know that down the line there's going to be a very big negotiation between the attorneys and the Assessment Review Commission for the filers, and that they're going to come up with a lower fractional level of assessment. And they're going to actually have lower taxable values. But they want to make sure that whatever number they put there is lower than anything they're ever going to be able to settle the case for. And the reason is because the county never has to go lower than what you put there. So, we don't want people who are filing for themselves. You're only representing a single filer yourself. We don't want you to make, this would be a big mistake. If your home is valued for $600,000 and you put $595, the case actually may be settled for 9% less or 12% less, or in some cases even 18% less. But if you put something like $595 because you want to be fair about it, you want to be rational about it, the county will never go below what you put there. So many people just do, what the attorneys and the professional property tax reduction consultants are doing. They reduce by 50%. What I would say is that if your home is not valued right now at 65% of what you could resell it for, what you could sell it for, you're probably overvalued. So in terms of the rest of the assessment roll. So what you should do is bring it down to at least 65% of what you could sell your home for. So reduce it by 35%. But people actually, just they don't need to do the work because you can put any number you want into this section. So they'll just do what the professionals are doing. But no matter what, you need to have a lower value. Because again, as I said, Assessment Review Commission will not reduce to a market value lower than what you put there. And remember, all they can actually do is reduce the property or leave it the same. So this section is mandatory. You can't file a grievance application without a lower estimated value. Part C, this is the part of the application where you're telling Assessment Review Commission that you're representing yourself, that you're filing pro se. So you actually tell them, representative, you check self, and you put in your name and address, and you want to make sure you put in phone numbers and an email address where they could contact you. Because in the past, people were getting notified that they were not getting reduction, and they rejected the offer. And then afterwards, they would get contacted by the Assessment Review Commission, and they would want to negotiate with them. And the reason is because they didn't want them going to the appeal and filing the SCAR application. We've heard that, recently they're going to cut out this settlement conference process, but, they may still want to contact you. So don't forget, as I said earlier, you file this grievance application, you are going to get a decision. You have to either accept it or reject it. And if you're accepting it, you have to do it by a certain date. But in either case, they may want to contact you to negotiate over the phone. And that's the way it's been happening in the past. But you do have to fill out this part. Now, you can represent a relative, but you have to accompany the grievance application with an authorization letter or form. There's actually a form that you can access on the Assessment Review Commission website, which is an authorization form. But you do have to either accompany the grievance application with the authorization letter or form to represent someone else. But this part is mandatory. The next part of the application, all these questions, Part D, it all has to do with your property's inventory, which is a very, very important part of assessment, the property's inventory. It's actually the basis for the assessments that were done in the 2000s when they were doing assessment and an annual reassessment every year based on market value. They would look at comparable sales. They'd look at homes that sold that were comparable. What they were comparing were homes that they were assessing to homes that sold that had similar inventories. So this thing is very, very important regarding assessment, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. But this part of the grievance application, once I show you how to get to your property's inventory and to look at it, if there's a mistake there that's causing you to have a higher valuation, you want to put that down on your grievance application. Then step 2 would be you have to go back to the Department of Assessment and get that mistake corrected. Assessment Review Commission doesn't correct mistakes on the assessment roll, although they'll take it into consideration when they're evaluating your grievance application. So all these questions on Part B have to do with the property's inventory. Anybody who actually has something that they have to put into Part D, you only have to answer that one part of this whole section. Once you start it, it's not like you have to fill the whole thing out. Also, this is the part of the grievance application where if you want to add attachments, this is where you would add attachments. So at the bottom of Part D, it says other facts. If you're filing the paper application, you would simply write in see attachments, and then you would, as I mentioned, you would number your attachments, make sure you put the correct year on each attachment, and make sure you put the section, block, and lot on each attachment. Now, what people normally attach are things like engineer reports. You know, if they have a crack in the foundation of their home, that's a major structural problem, they would put that on their grievance form as an attachment. Sometimes people just take photographs if they can't describe, you know, the problem that they think is impacting their market value. But people do submit architectural reviews. They may submit some sort of legal document that has to do with an environmental factor. You know, there's all kinds of reasons that people think that they're overvalued. And they want to submit additional evidence with their grievance application. This is where they would do it. So as I said, both of these agencies, both Assessment Review Commission and the Department of Assessment, have very important websites. The first one we want to look at is Department of Assessment. And as I said, the address is www.mynassauproperty.com. That should be familiar with some people. And this website has been around a very long time. And it used to be the greatest website that the county had. You can find all the information that the Department of Assessment had. It was done during the reassessment program. And all the information that Department of Assessment has for every single property in the county was on this website, including every single year, all the sales that we use to determine every single property's assessment. Unfortunately, about 2 years ago, the county vended out the management of this website to another company, and they inserted a security screen into this website, and they made it very, very difficult to use. Not only that, they don't provide any information or instructions on how to use it, so I'm going to go over that with you. The security screen, which we're going to avoid, basically they'll show you these window panes, and they're going to ask you questions, which panes have a bicycle in it or something like that, and then they're going to show you words, and you have to tell them what words you see, and then they're going to show you elongated words in script that are very hard to decipher, and you have to kind of decipher it and put that information in. And then when you're all done with that and you've done it properly, which is hard to do, you send it, and then you get to a search screen, and it allows you to search one property one time and kicks you out. So that's very unfriendly, very unuser-friendly, and very difficult to use and not practical, and it's not helpful in getting information to file a grievance. So there is a better way to go, much better way to go, and you have to know how to do it. So you go to mynassauproperty.com, you come to this page, you're going to avoid this security screen. You don't have to tell them you're not a robot. What you want to do is, there's a toolbar on top, and at the very end of the toolbar in very small letters, it says login. What you want to do is click that. Once you click login, it gives you the ability to create an account with mynassauproperty.com. That's what you want to do. You want to create an account with this website. So you click login, you go to create an account, and then you simply, this is an easy one, you just put in a username and password and enter, and then you've created an account with this website. Then you go back to this main screen, click login, and then you want to actually sign in. You want to log in to the website by putting in your username and password. You put in your username and password, and then you enter, and that'll bring you to the search screen, and then you could use the search screen as long as you're logged in. You could use it for as many searches as you want, which is where you want to be. So now you could search the property either by section, block, and lot. Hopefully you've gotten it from some of these other places that I mentioned. But if you don't have it, you actually can search it by the address. So what you do is you put in the property's address, you put in the number, the house number, and then you put in the name of the street. You just want to put in the name of the street. You don't want to put in avenue, block, place, boulevard, turnpike, anything like that. You just want to put in the name of the street. So if you live on Primrose Lane, you just want to write in Primrose. Underneath that, you put in your town and your zip code, and you click search, and then that'll bring up the property. So the first thing you should do is search your own property, because you want to get the information off the website, especially the inventory information that we're going to show you in a minute. Once you search for your property or for any property, it'll bring up the main screen. You'll see a picture of the property, and there's a lot of things you could do from this main screen. It's the assessed value screen. The first thing is you could view correspondence. If you click view correspondence, you're going to bring up your notice of tentative assessment. That's the thing that comes in the mail that they're going to no longer send. So you can get it online by clicking view correspondence. And if you haven't gotten it yet, you can get it right now. It's online. The next feature that's very, very useful, you can click area maps. And area maps will bring up a big tax map of your neighborhood. You know, if this is your house, it'll bring up a tax map of your neighborhood. And you could click any parcel on the tax map, and then that'll bring you to the assessed value screen of that parcel. And then you could just really hopscotch around, the neighborhood just by viewing area maps and clicking from one to the other. The reason you would do that is because you'd be able to look and see, different assessed values on the tax maps that you're looking at. Underneath the photo, there's also a very important tab. That's the property description tab. That's the one you're going to use to find the inventory, and we're going to show you that in a minute. And below that is the main information that has the assessed value that you're filing the grievance for. And it will show you the full market value and also the taxable assessed value. The last very important feature on this page is that you could see the whole history that the property has had over the last 8 years of filing challenges to assessments, either at the Assessment Review Commission or in the appeals process in a small claims assessment review. All you have to do is click the bottom to see the filing history of the property. And, if it's your property, presumably, unless you're a new owner, if you've owned the home for a long time, you'll know the history. But if you want to look at other homes that have very low assessed values relative to yours, you could look and see the filing history and look and see, what these homes have been reduced to year after year. So what we want to do before we leave this screen is you want to click Property Description tab for your property, and that's going to bring you to your property's inventory. Now again, this information is very, very important in the assessment process. So when they did the assessment program initially in the early 2000s, and then they were doing annual reassessment, the assessments were based on comparing, a property that was a subject to the assessment to properties that sold that were similar. And the similarities were in the inventory. So this inventory, it will tell you the lot size of the property. You want to make sure your lot size is correct. It'll indicate any location factors. There are both negative location factors and positive location factors too that add assessed value to the property. So if you should have a negative location factor and you don't, one would be, it says Long Island Railroad. That would mean the back of the property or the side of the property abuts to the Long Island Railroad. Also for properties that are on main streets that have 4 lanes and a double yellow line in the middle, That would be indicated. Properties that are in residential neighborhoods, that abut commercial neighborhoods, especially for properties that are, the last one or two in the residential neighborhood, and their property is next to commercial, you would want to have that on there as a negative location factor. There are positive location factors, as I mentioned, that add assessment. So if you see one of these factors there, and it really doesn't apply to you, you have to make sure that you get that corrected as well. So one would be water view. Water view adds assessed value to a property, and waterfront adds a lot of assessed value to a property. So, Great Neck, as you know, is on a peninsula, and there is a lot of water. But if your property, happens to say water view and you don't have that, you want to get that fixed. Also, it'll indicate the style of the property. And this is a very important factor because when they are doing reassessment, they do compare splits to splits, ranches to ranches, colonials to colonials. There are a lot of different models of homes, so you want to make sure that the style of your home is correct. They also indicate the condition of the home. CDU stands for the condition, desirability, and utility of a property. So that's a condition. Most of them say average. But if you know that you have a major problem with your home, and it might not be average, maybe it should be below average, or it should possibly in some cases even be poor, that has to be correct. It'll also indicate the year the property was built, the age. So if the property was built in 1923, it should not say 1993. These are all mistakes that appear on the assessment roll. And, the mistakes go back to the time when the county started doing reassessment, was ordered to do reassessment. They hired a company to come in and do mass appraisal. This company basically transferred all of the information that the county had on actually index cards. They transferred it into their computer system, and in some cases, obviously, mistakes were made. If the property owners haven't corrected these mistakes, they just transfer from year to year. So, it's very important to know what's going on there, because once they do reassessment again, which they're going to have to do at some point, probably sooner rather than later, because the assessment roll is so inaccurate right now and so uneven, they're going to use the inventory as the basis for doing market value assessment. So you want to make sure it's correct. The most important factor that you see up there says total living area, square feet of living area. That's the single most important factor. When they pull comps, they start with living area to living area, and then they go style to style and lot size to lot size and other factors. But living area is first, and if you have 2,800 square feet of living area and it says 4,000 or something, that's a big, big mistake. It's been causing you to be overvalued, and you have to get that corrected. The other factors, the other features of the home are there. Number of bathrooms, whether or not it has a finished basement, a finished attic, pools, porches, attached garages, decks. All that information is there, and it should be correct. So you want to check this very carefully. Now again, if you find information that's wrong, that's been causing you to have a higher assessment than you should have, you're going to put it on your grievance application in Part D, but then you're also going to go back to the Department of Assessment and have it corrected. That's very, very important. And in doing these comparables, you want to make sure that you're comparing inventories. So you want to compare homes that are the same style and have similar features when you're doing comparables. Also the same school district. So that's the first four parts. And as you see, you have to fill out Part A, B, and C, and Part D is totally optional. Part E is really, it's very easy, but it's the basis for these challenges being reduced. And the challenge really isn't against market value, it's really against this level of assessment that the county, the Nassau County Department uses every year and sets the assessment to 1/4 or 1%. So when you're filing your challenge, you want to have the same advantage. You want to be in the same boat as the attorneys and the property tax reduction consultants regarding this negotiation in the level of assessment. So in order to do this correctly, the right way, on your grievance application, when you get to this part, you simply are leaving out most of it. It's broken down to little a, b, c, d, and e. What you have to do is just fill in little b. Little b is asking you what is your lower estimated value that you put in part B. So you just bring that information over into little b. The rest of it you want to leave blank because of what's really happening over at the Assessment Review Commission. Now, you know, I used to spend a lot of time when I did these workshops trying to explain how these challenges are being handled, what is the basis for these challenges and what they're doing. And, you know, it was partly based on information that, you know, I knew when I worked at assessment on how, you know, these attorneys operated and what they were challenging. They actually were challenging, what they would do was do something called the ratio study. And they were actually challenging the county's level of assessment based on the real sales of properties. So, you know, what they would normally do is look at every property that's sold and compare it to the assessment, market value assessment that was on the assessment roll. And by doing that, you know, in a rising market, they could prove that the taxable assessed value is not 1/4% of the actual sales price of the property. It was lower than 1/4%. So that was the basis, you know, the legal basis for these challenges. And then they would come up with a lower, presumably a lower value, taxable assessed value, by coming up with a lower level of assessment. And they would have this negotiation back and forth, and, you know, the Assessment Review Commission would agree. Now, over the last 8 years, they've been very proactive in trying to settle these cases, as I said, because they don't want any of these challenges, any of these grievances to carry over after the tax bills are published. Once the tax bills are published, if these grievances get settled after that date, then the county's responsible for the difference between what was billed and what should have been billed at the lower value. So they just decided that they're going to basically reduce everything based upon these lower levels of assessment. So we actually know what they've been settling the cases for. However, you know, it seems over the last year, Newsday has done a very extensive expose about this process and about what's happening at the Assessment Review Commission. Really, everybody should read it. It was written by an investigative reporter, Matt Clark, and he's calling the series Separate and Unequal. And that basically, he's really gone into a lot of depth and detail about what's going on between these two parties, these attorneys representing these massive amount of filers and the Assessment Review Commission. So I used to think that I had some idea of how they would arrive at these lower values, but actually it seems that they're just using their leverage to come up with a lower number, and that these are the lower numbers that they're coming up with. Now, for homes that have been filing every single year, every time, if they get what's called this carry-forward provision, every time they come up with a lower taxable, lower level of assessment, they simply apply the lower level of assessment to the lower market value and then bring it lower for the following year. That's called carry-forward. If, however, you know, the homeowner missed a year or missed a few years or somehow put their home up for sale or did a physical change to the property by doing more work on the property, then they weren't getting carry forward provision. However, they were still getting the lower level of assessment. So ARC would presumably come up with a new market value, then apply the lower level of assessment, come up with a lower taxable assessed value. And then once they have these lower taxable assessed values, they simply just transfer them back to the Department of Assessment's assessment roll. And then, as I said, Department of Assessment sets everything at 1/4%. So when they get these lower taxable assessed values, they simply convert it to a new market value by multiplying it by 400. So that's the way things seem to be happening. But what we do know is that the actual, filers are getting this advantage of this negotiation where people who are not filing are basically frozen in January 1st, 2010. So by default, year after year, they're picking up a greater part of the pro rata share of the tax levies. Their tax bills are increasing. Now, I used to spend a lot of time explaining this part of the whole thing, Part E. And one day, the Department of Assessment and the Assessment Review Commission came to listen to what I was saying. And we actually knew they were settling at these lower values because it is on or was on the Assessment Review Commission website for properties that were filing grievances and were settled. We could see every year what they were being settled for. After they heard what I said, they took all the information off their website. So, but once Newsday did this expose, they actually have now, this year, they put a new disclaimer on the website, and they actually basically say that anybody who's filing gets the same advantage, whether you're filing pro se or you're filing by an attorney. So, and that's on the website now. So, that seems to be the case based upon the last of the series that was published on December 31st, that whether you're filing pro se or you have an attorney, level of assessment is going to be settled at a negotiated lower value, and everybody's supposed to get the same thing. What they actually highlighted was that in the earlier years, the attorneys with the leverage, the companies were actually getting better settlements than the pro ses, but even if they were getting 18%, the homeowner had to pay 50%, so they only walked away with 9. The pro ses were walking away with somewhere between 9 and 11, in some cases more. So it never was a disadvantage to filing pro se. But anyway, the important thing to know and to remember is that if you're doing your own application, this is really where the settlement is going to come in. This is where the lower value is going to come in. And you have to make sure you do it correctly. On the paper application, it's really easy. You just leave everything blank, and you just carry over your lower estimated value, and you put that on the line little b. The rest of it you leave blank. Online, it's a little trickier because the program that they use defaults to 0.25% and that's the one thing you don't want to do. You don't want to file a grievance indicating that the correct level of assessment should be 0.25%. So we're going to show you that in a little while. The rest of the application is pretty simple too. Part F has to do with sales. And we're going to show you how to find sales. As I said, there are websites where you could find recent sales. Only use sales that happened in the last 18 months. But if you do find sales for properties that's sold for less than you're valued for, you want to put that, or you may want to put that into your grievance application. And as I said, Assessment Review Commission has a feature on their website where you can actually look up sales relative to your property, using your property as the subject and finding sales of homes that are similar to your property. And then the similarities would be based on living area and the other factors on the inventory. So if you do have sales, comparable sales that are going to help you, you put it in this part of the application. But if you don't have any sales, which most people probably won't find, you could leave this part blank and still file a valid grievance application. So, that's the law in Nassau County. You could file a challenge to your assessment without any evidence, without any comp sales. That may not be true in every village. These villages are very tough. Their assessment rolls, the ones that have separate assessment rolls, are very different than the county's assessment roll. And they seem to defend their assessment rolls pretty aggressively, especially some villages more than others. But it's a completely different process to file a challenge to your village assessment than it is to file this. This you could file without any evidence whatsoever. So the last part of the application has to do with, this is mandatory, you have to date and sign the application, Part G. So you have to date and sign it. But, that's basically it. So in review, I just said you need to make sure you have the correct form that has the correct tax year. You need to make sure that you know your section, block, and lot. You need to know the estimated value that the county assigned to your property. And you need to have a lower estimated value. And then you need to know how to fill out the form. You don't want to have any duplicate filings. You want to make sure on Part E that you just file it by moving over your lower estimated value and leaving the rest of it blank. Because according to the last disclaimer, they basically tell you to leave it blank and that you're going to get the same benefit that the negotiation is going to yield, which is what you want if you're filing pro se. So that's basically the form. We're going to do the online part also, and the online part has some very important features. And people, some people may want to file online. People actually, when they get the hang of filing it online, then going forward, they always just file online. Because the advantage to that is you get an electronic receipt when you file online. We wanted to go over the website with you for the Assessment Review Commission. There's some very valuable information there. So the way you get on this website, you have to go to the Assessment Review Commission's main website. And you do that by going to the county website first. Click Departments, click Assessment Review Commission. And then once you get to the Assessment Review Commission main website, you click Arrow. Arrow stands for Assessment Review on the Web. Now, all this information is on the yellow form that we handed out to you, so you're going to be able to take all this information home. But you want to get on Arrow's main menu. Now, if you've never used this website before, you want to enroll, you want to sign up with this website, you want to register with it, just like you did with mynassauproperty.com. The main menu is also where they have the sales locator feature. Before you actually do a grievance, if you do want to check these sales, you would click Sales Locator on the main menu. There's also a way to actually go back into your grievance application after you submit it to make revisions, and you would do that from this main menu. You would click View or Change Your Appeal from this main menu. We're going to show you that in a minute. But the first thing you have to do if you're going to use this program is you have to register with ARC. So the first thing you would do from the main menu is click Register with ARC. Then you're going to get to a registration page, and what you want to do there is you'll put in your name, your address, city, state, and zip code, phone numbers, other numbers. You'll indicate whether or not you're representing yourself, your email address. Actually, all the information that's in Part C of the grievance application is on this registration page. So by completing this registration page, you're also doing Part C of the grievance application. So you basically fill that information in, and then you have to give the program a username and password, a user ID and password. And once you do that, you're ready and you click Complete Registration. And then you've actually registered with ARC. So once you register with ARC, you're ready to actually file a form grievance application online. But what we suggest people do is we want you to fill out the paper application, have all the mandatory information first, and then you may want to actually use the sales locator or search for sales somewhere else before you begin to see if you want to do Part F. So have all the information in front of you. This program actually, you can't open it up, do two or three parts of it, save it and close, and then come back and resume where you closed it. You have to go through the whole thing as you're doing it. Although it does let you come back and make revisions to individual sections. But you really have to be ready to go for your first time around, when you click File and Appeal online. So you have all your information with you. You click File and Appeal online, and that'll bring you to the grievance application, the online grievance application. So the first thing you want to tell it is that you're using the correct form. Online, they combine AR1 and AR2, so that means anybody filing for a Class 1, 2, 3, or 4 property would click Form AR1 or 2. You click that. There's not going to be a problem with the tax year. It's just going to say tax year 2019-2020 now. Another thing that I didn't mention is that if you do this online form, try not to wait till the end. Don't wait till the end of February to do it, because that's when the professionals are all uploading their grievance applications, and they have tens and tens of thousands. So in the past, the program has had a tendency to crash. And also, it makes it very hard to go back in and do any revision. And you certainly don't want to wait till the last day to do it online. If you come down to the wire and it's the last day or a couple of days, just do the paper application and bring it there, or mail it certified mail. Anyway, so after you check, indicate that you're doing AR1 or AR2, then you go down to Part A, and you're ready to put in your section block and lot, your parcel ID. So again, the way you do that online is you type in that string of numbers that was on the notice of tentative assessment. If you don't have the notice with you, or you haven't printed it off of mynassauproperty.com, you could find it. There's a search feature. There's a magnifier there. You click that, and you put in the property's address. You put in the house number and the name of the street. Again, you only use the name of the street. Don't put in avenue, block, place, etc. Just the name of the street. Put in the town and the zip code. Click search. That should bring up the parcel. Once you have the parcel, there's a link to the parcel ID. You click the parcel ID. That'll load it into the grievance application. Also in Part A, you have to put the owner's name. That's the name on the deed, so it's either the name of the person who owns it, name or names, or it's going to be in a trust, a life estate, a corporate LLC, a corporation. You want to put that down on the next line, other owners' names. Then you come to Part B, and that, again, that's your lower estimated value. You just type in your lower estimated value into Part B. And then you scroll through Part C, because you actually did that when you registered with ARC. So you have Part C completed. That'll bring you to Part D. And again, this part is totally optional. If you do have problems on your inventory, you want to indicate that here. If you don't, you could leave the whole thing blank. Also, this is a section where you could load attachments. You could upload attachments. So normally in the past, the way this has worked is that you have to load attachments as a revision. So what you have to do is actually do the whole application and click submit. And then you can come back in and you could upload attachments. There'll be a place where you could click additional information, and then you're going to upload your attachments into that box, and then you're going to click submit changes for this section for Part D. This section has a feature where you could submit changes. But again, you do seem to have to do this as a revision. So you have to go through the whole application first before you do your attachments, submit it, and then come back in, get to Part D, then do your upload of your attachments, and then submit that. I mean, it's a little cumbersome to do attachments online, but it is doable. Part E of the application is very tricky, and this is the part you have to be most careful of when you're doing it online. Remember, there are 5 boxes. The only information you want to submit is your lower estimated value, your lower estimated market value. So in order to do that, you can't type it in this section. What you have to do is carry it over from Part B, and the way to do that, on the toolbar on top, it says calculate. First thing you do is click that once. Once you click calculate one time, it'll bring over your lower estimated value. Then you're going to see all this default information on the screen, and you want to delete it all. You don't want to submit it with that information, so you have to do it box by box. You have to clean it up. The way you do that is you click into the box, you backspace out the information, you hit the tab key, and then that'll take the cursor out of the box. You can't actually click the cursor out of the box or else the information comes back. So you have to do this for each of the boxes that has this default information. You have to clean it all up. And what you want to do is have a Part E that only has your lower estimated value. So this part is very tricky online. They programmed it to default to 1/4 or 1%. But you absolutely don't want to submit it that way. And on this disclaimer, it actually does say that you should leave everything blank. But the program defaults to 1/4 or 1%. So I would follow their instructions, which have always been my instructions. You have to leave everything blank except for little b. Part F has to do with sales. Now this is the sales locator part of the program. Now you could actually do this before you do your application. You go to the main menu for Arrow and you click Sales Locator. It's going to bring you to this screen, and you want to put in, if you want to look at sales in your neighborhood relative to your property, using your property as the subject, you're going to put in your parcel ID, and you're going to do that by entering the string of numbers that we showed you that's on the notice of tentative assessment. If you don't have the string of numbers, you can get it again by clicking the magnifier, doing the property search by putting in the house number, the name of the street, and the town, and the zip code. Clicking search, it'll bring up a link for the parcel. Then you click the parcel. Once you do that, you enter that, and it's going to bring you to a screen that's going to show you your property as the subject property. And then if you want to see sales, you're going to click Find Sales. You click Find Sales, and that's going to bring you to a screen that's going to actually show you, your home as a subject and sales in your neighborhood that happened recently. In this case, the home that was used, the sales that come up aren't going to help the program at all. It's not going to help the application at all, but you may find 1 or 2 sales. So if there are sales that are keepers, there's a box that you could click to keep the sale, and then you could actually enter those sales into the grievance application. Or there is a way on the grievance application on Part F to enter in other sales that you found. You just have to enter in the sales date and the sales price and the address of the property and any comments you might have. But again, sales are going to be very hard to find that are going to help your case. But if you do have them and you do find them, then, by all means, you can use them. So that's Part F. Part G of the application is the way you electronically sign the application. What they do is they present a string of letters, and you have to type in the string of letters that you see, and then you have to basically scroll through your whole electronic application, look at all the parts, make sure it's correct, make sure it is the way you want it to go. And then you click Submit Application, and then you will get an electronic receipt from the Assessment Review Commission. But if you, and that's very important, you want to get that receipt. And if you want to make revisions, you can go back to Arrow main menu, click View or Change Your Appeal. It'll bring up your appeal. You go to the section you want to change, and then you actually make the changes, and then you click Submit Changes, and then you go back to the bottom and submit the whole application that you've revised. You actually have to do the attachments that way as well. So if you're making attachments in Part D, you do it that way. You do it as a revision. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody again for coming today, and thank you to the Great Neck Library. And we are available to help and answer questions during this period. So thank you. Everybody get home safe, and we'll see everybody soon.